Before we begin Unit 14, here is the answer to the Unit 13 question. The best answer is choice D.
Development of land for our own purposes leads to habitat loss. When humans unnaturally introduce invasive species to areas, ecosystems are often disrupted and sometimes eliminated completely. Overexploitation of resources can directly and indirectly affect the environment's biotic and abiotic components. Although climate change is human-induced and does lead to loss of biodiversity, it is not considered to be an intentional human activity. Unit 14. Too much of a good thing.
The population of a species is supposed to be in constant flux. Population change is equal to the number of organisms being born and moving into an area minus the number dying and those moving away.
There are many factors that determine population size, such as temperature, sunlight, water, and the availability of nutrients.
The combination of all of these factors is referred to as environmental resistance. Environmental resistance defines the carrying capacity or maximum population of a given species that a particular habitat can sustain indefinitely.
Almost all organisms are unable to control the amount of environmental resistance they face. Let's take a look at a very basic example of carrying capacity.
Based on the amount of sunlight, rain, temperature, and soil conditions, a specific amount of grass can exist in an area. If deer move into that area and there are no natural predators, their population will continue to increase at an exponential rate. However, as more deer populate the area, grass is consumed at higher rates.
Eventually, the grass cannot keep up and the plant's population will decline. Without enough food to support their numbers, the deer population will, in turn, begin to fall. Fewer deer provides the grass an opportunity to repopulate.
The cyclic fluctuations in the populations of these species continue until a dynamic but stable arrangement is reached between the two.
This example reveals how population balance is achieved between two interconnected species. However, the truth is that in every ecosystem, there are countless species interconnections taking place.
The healthiest ecosystems are those in which these balances have been established and maintained for long periods of time.
If all populations are controlled naturally, why is there concern about our human population?
If you remember, we said earlier that almost all organisms are unable to control the amount of environmental resistance they face. The reason for the almost all is that humans have found ways to beat the system. Our ability to think has allowed us to change the natural environmental resistance that would otherwise keep our population in check.
For millions of years, the human population was controlled and held well below 1 billion by the interconnections we had with other species and our environment.
However, only in the last 200 years or so has the human population soared, increasing exponentially from approximately 2 billion to over 7.5 billion in just the last century.
Why did this happen? Simple. We discovered fossil fuels and developed applications that allowed us to remove the environmental resistance factors that otherwise would have limited our population.
The exploitation of fossil fuels has allowed us to create a false habitat for our species.
We live in fabricated homes that are heated and cooled to our desire. We invented modes of transportation that take us wherever we want to go. Getting dinner can be as easy as hitting a few buttons on our cell phones. We're not worried about being attacked by predator species. And we've developed medicines and medical procedures to keep us in good health.
The species interactions that once existed between humans and their ecosystems have been severed. We have so disconnected ourselves from nature that there is no longer anything to prevent our exponential growth.
If you're thinking, can this continue? The answer is, of course not.
Relying on fossil fuels as a primary energy source does not follow the first principle of sustainability. Once fossil fuels are exhausted, unless we find alternative energy sources and learn to live in a sustainable manner, we will either have to return to a more natural state of existence or become extinct ourselves.
Overpopulation is the root cause of many of our environmental problems.
We've used fossil fuels to manage our food production, which so far has been able to sustain our enormous population. However, even with our advances in technology, eventually our food productivity will no longer be able to keep up with the world's population.
In addition, when the fossil fuels run out or become economically unavailable, widespread famine is inevitable. Unfortunately, feeding our species is not the only problem. Our unnatural population is taking a huge toll on our planet and the other species that call it home.
Population change differs from country to country. In general, the more developed a country is, the greater is a trend to stabilize or even decrease the population.
This is primarily due to the fact that families realize that having less offspring is financially beneficial and provides an advantage in education and the workforce.
In less developed countries, there is a trend to produce more offspring in order to increase the chances of economic success and, in the harshest circumstances, survive.
Some countries are implementing strategies in an attempt to combat overpopulation. However, there are many economic, moral, and religious implications that need to be considered.
The statistical study of population dynamics is called demographics.
Especially if you teach mathematics or the social sciences, just a little research on the topic will go a long way toward finding great ways to infuse relevant concepts into your teachings.
We'll leave you with one final thought on population and the field of demographics. Our Social Security system is based on the premise that the younger workforce will support those who have retired.
However, because the population growth in the United States has stabilized, along with the fact that people are now living longer, there are less people in the workforce category than those who are retired.
As a result, the future of Social Security is uncertain.
So you see, even something as seemingly part of the American way of life as Social Security is actually just another component in the unnatural social system that we have created, and one that's totally disconnected from the natural world.
Squirrels, frogs, and pigeons really don't care if you lose their Social Security check. Here's your question for Unit 14.
Which of the following statements is false?
Choice A. Overpopulation is the root cause of many of our environmental problems.
Choice B. Even with our advances in technology, eventually our food productivity will no longer be able to keep up with the world's population.
Choice C. When the fossil fuels run out or become economically unavailable, widespread famine will be avoided by applying renewable energy.
Or choice D. We've used fossil fuels to manage our food production, which so far has been able to sustain our enormous population.
The answer and explanation are provided at the beginning of Unit 15.